Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to today's webinar on scenario planning for international visitor arrivals in Asia Pacific 2021 to 2023. We have a great program ahead of us today with some great speakers from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, Euromonitor International, and TCI Research. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Paul Brangan. I'm the Director of Communications and External Affairs at the Pacific Asia Travel Association, and I will be your MC for today. Before we get to today's program, I do have a couple of notes just for all attendees to be aware of. I know many of you are familiar with Zoom, but for those who aren't, please just notice that on the bottom of your screen on the toolbar, there's two functions. There's a chat function and a Q&A function. For the chat function, please use that to engage with other participants and panelists to say hello, introduce yourself, where you're from. However, do not submit questions to the speakers using this function. It's difficult for the moderator to go back and forth between the chat function and the Q&A function. Please also note for the chat function, it's on default, it only sends messages to the panelists. So if you want to send it to all participants, please make sure to change it on the drop-down menu to all participants and panelists if you want to say hello to everybody. For the questions, please submit them in the Q&A function as noted on your screen here. The speakers will try to get to as many questions as possible during the Q&A section at the end of towards the end of the program. Please note that also they'll try to also answer them directly by typing them, because I know we might have many questions during today's webinar. Oops, sorry here. Okay, and with that, that's all my notes. As I said, we do have a Q&A at the end of the session. So during the presentations, feel free to submit your questions, but they will be answered at the end. So don't worry if they don't answer them during the presentation. And let's go first, then move on to our opening remarks. And with that, please allow me to introduce PATA CEO, Dr. Mario Hardy. Hello, Mario.
Good afternoon, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone, or morning or evening, wherever you are around the world. Great pleasure to be here with you today. What a year. A year ago, I remember having this very same webinar with the same speakers where we actually covered what 2020 was looking like. Now looking at the past year of 2020 and all the challenges that we face in the situation we're still in today and looking forward. And I thought I'd actually start today by just sharing with you a quote from an article I read in Fast Company earlier in the week, which I think pretty much describe what it is we're going to talk about today. I think if there is any habit we should consider breaking, it's the confidence about what's going to happen in the year to come. And I think that pretty much covers what it is we will discuss today. Is, as you all know, for those of you who've been following PATA for many years, the PATA forecast has become something of a legend within the industry, something that everyone is anticipates and follows every year. Well, I don't think it's actually easy for any organization at this time to actually do a forecast, to look at the future based on what happened in the past, because things are changing on a daily basis. This crisis, what actually it's been teaching us is the fact that actually it's extremely volatile. The situation changes by the day, sometimes by the hour. So what we'll be doing today is actually talking about what we call scenario planning, looking at different scenarios based on different facts and what we currently know today. Well, is a vaccine in place? How fast the vaccine will be implemented? How effective it will be, and etc. How much it will be rolled out in different countries will have different impact on our ability to travel moving forward. We will be looking at different scenarios from the more pessimistic view of what could happen in 2021, maybe a more somehow realistic view, and of course a very optimistic view of what could happen in 2021. Each one of the presenters will present different cases and different studies and research about what they actually seen in the industry at the moment. But more importantly, what we need to decide at the end of this is, what do you think based on your local knowledge will happen in 2021. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased today that we have a number of individuals who are joining us for this session, and we'll let Paul introduce our next speakers. But I'm also pleased that we have Olivier today with us, who will be sharing sentiment analysis. What do people want moving forward? Do they want to travel? How do they feel about traveling? Which is another component that I think is really important when we think about the future of our industry moving forward. So I will leave this for now and come back for the discussion later. Paul, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Mario. Yes, as we said, we have a great program with great speakers. So let's just jump right into it. Our first presentation will focus on the Asia Pacific visitor forecast for 2020 to 2023. And with that, we are pleased to have the Associate Dean and Mr. and Miss Chan Chuk Fu Professor in International Tourism in the School of Hotel and Tourism Management at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, Professor Haiyan Song. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Song. Professor Song?
Okay, good afternoon from Hong Kong. This update actually is forecasting update of last year. If you attended the webinar last May and June, which we generate the forecast within Asia Pacific based on the information that was available then. So today, actually, given half year or 6 or 7 months already passed, new information has become available, and the COVID-19 situation has evolved. So we are now going to further update the forecast based on the most recent information. Now let me share the screen with you. So I think, okay, so I think that's the last
view,
one. Okay.
Professor Song, you have it on presenter view. Please switch to your screen.
Okay, let me switch. Now it's okay?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so yeah, so I'm Professor Haiyan Song from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University and leading the PATA visitor forecasting team. With me also, we have Dr. Anyu Liu from University of Surrey, who will answer you some questions after the presentation. So basically, the objective of the forecast are to provide a scenario forecast of quarterly and annual tourist visitor arrivals to 39 destinations within Asia Pacific. So within each destinations, we tend to forecast 30 to 40 source markets arrivals to a particular destination. So we developed 3 scenarios. One is called most severe scenarios, and then medium scenario, and the mild scenario, based on the COVID-19 situation, and then also the recovery of the economy to forecast tourist arrivals to this region. These are the countries that we forecast arrivals. Altogether, 39 countries divided into different regions. Most of the presentation today actually will be focused on these 5 sub-regions, although I will present the forecast for 2 or 3 countries in particular, just to illustrate the country level forecast, but the presentation mainly focus on the sub-region level. For those, if you want to know the detailed forecast for each of the destinations, please do visit the PATA website soon. I think the forecast will be uploaded very soon, so you can have a look at the PATA website if you are a member. Okay, so the process of forecasting actually is quite complex. it involves 3 stages, starting from data analysis and to identify the long-run relationships between the demand for tourism within a particular destination and the influencing factors, and decide what type of models we are using. And then we're using 2 types of models. One is econometric forecasting models. The second one is time series model to generate the baseline forecast, assuming that the COVID-19 had not happened, because the data made available to us was up to the end of 2019, so before the COVID-19 started. And then because of the COVID-19 has generated a significant impact on our forecast, so that we have to using judgmental adjustment approach to set different scenarios in terms of looking at how the tourist arrivals would differ from our baseline forecast in different scenarios. And these scenarios were set based on the expert opinion about COVID-19 situation in different regions and different countries or different destinations. So that's the process. But to simplify the strategy that we use to generate a scenario forecast, here's a simplified procedure. So basically, the first stage, we are using time series and econometric model to generate baseline forecast, assuming there's no COVID-19. But then, because in most destinations, the data were made available up to the second quarter of 2020, when actually the COVID-19 was still progressing, and the impact actually has been felt through. And we use the actual arrival data within the first quarters of 2020 to adjust our scenario forecast. And then we look at how the recovery path that will be after we have known the actual data in the first 2 quarters of 2020. And then we develop the scenarios for third quarter onward up to 2023, the last quarter. And then we generate the scenario forecast, but some of the forecasts may still suffer from bias due to the scenario setting, which we use a certain criteria, which may not apply to certain countries or destinations. So we need expert adjustment to further adjust the scenario forecast generated in second quarter. So in terms of scenario setting, so the next couple of slides actually describe how we set the scenario. Basically, we all know COVID-19 has had a profound negative impact on both international and domestic travels. So that is because the closure of airport and public transportations, tourist attractions, commercial and peer-to-peer sharing accommodations, and so on and so forth. All these businesses actually was mostly shut down during the height of COVID-19 pandemic for most destinations. And also border closing and visa restrictions and so on also further negatively influence tourist arrivals to different destinations, plus quarantine by arrivals, although some countries actually gradually opened its borders, but then you have to go through the quarantine when you arrive in a destination for a certain number of days. So these are the factors that actually negatively affect tourism demand in different destinations. But in terms of the method we use in setting those scenarios, so we first look at the past research that has been carried out, looking at the impact of public health pandemics on tourism arrivals in different destinations, especially looking at the SARS pandemic and foot and mouth disease in the UK, H1N1, flus and so on and so forth. So we look at how those has impacted tourism demand in the past and how it recovered as a result after the pandemic has gradually disappeared. So we look at the pattern in terms of recover based on past research. And then we also carry out some impact assessment of COVID-19 on national economies and also tourism by different organizations such as Oxford Economics, Euromonitor International, and the UNWTO. All these organizations actually have carried out research looking at how the pandemic influenced the economies of different countries or in the world as a whole, and how this influence the tourism as well, so that we look at their forecasts or their studies to inform our scenario setting. And we also use the information on travel restrictions, vaccine development, especially recently we have seen many countries have already started to inoculate its population, although some countries are ahead of others, but in general, this positive news indicating the light is in the end of the tunnel. So this is some sort of encouragement in terms of tourism demand. So this is obviously it's a very important factor that actually influence the scenario setting. We also actually are using expert predictions on potential future outbreak, especially medical health professionals, in terms of how this virus will evolve in the future. We already seen there's some variants, mutations of virus in different countries and destinations. So this actually, this information are also been taken into consideration when we set our scenario, but that's probably a couple of months ago. But now actually there are new situation has been developed. This probably will have a further impact on the forecast. But since we set our scenario quite realistically, I think to the worst, actually our severe scenario should cover the possibilities of the worsening of a future pandemic. So now actually, after setting the scenario, we generate forecasts based on the models that we use. And now I'm going to present at the regional level of visitor arrivals to those sub-regions within Asia Pacific. I have to stress here, and all these forecasts are related to international arrivals to a particular sub-region. There's nothing to do with the domestic tourists, because if we're talking about a domestic tourist, it will be a different story. China, for example, although international arrivals is still very limited, but domestic tourism is booming because the COVID-19 situation had been controlled. Right, the first sub-region is Americas. As you can see from this diagram and also the numbers at the bottom of this diagram, you can see in 2021 probably is the worst year. I think this year will be even worse than 2020 because in Americas, the COVID-19 situation is getting worse from second quarter. So it's the first quarter, they still have quite a bit of travel into that region. But 2021 is going to be tough because especially that's carried over from the second half of 2020 and then early this year. So the pandemic is still quite prevalent. So the impact was still very severe. So no matter which scenario you are looking at, mild, medium, or severe, it's very low. But then
Professor
it started to recover.
Sorry, Professor Song, sorry, your presentation seems to be cut off at the bottom a bit. It's,
Cut off?
yeah, we only see up to mild.
Oh, sorry. So I don't know what happened. It's, on my screen, it seems fine, right? But anyhow, right, I probably explain, and then at the end of the presentation, I'm sure you can make the slides available to people who are interested, so we can send a copy to them. So yeah, apparently it's on my screen, it's fine. I don't know what happened. For the Northeast Asia, you can see the pattern is similar, but 2020 actually perhaps is the worst. But then in from 2021, it started to recover until 2023. If you look at the mild scenario, actually it will recover 94%. That is in comparison with the level in 2019. So it's already recovered up to 94%. But the severe scenario, which you may not be able to see, is only recover half of the 2019 figure for the Northeast Asia. For West Asia, the situation is similar. You can see 2021, it started to recover, but then in 2023, end of 2023, 93% recovery compared with 2019, that in the mild level, but then in the severe level, it is about 47% recovery. For Pacific, the picture is a little bit more brighter. So the recovery is faster. So up to 2023 is will fully recovered from the pandemic. This is up to 102% in comparison with 2019. But this is only recovered to the level 2019. So there's no growth, no significant growth at all in comparison with the 2019 figure. And the severe scenario is 51% recovery. So that's the range of the possibilities for Pacific. I think probably I missed a couple of sub-regions. South Asia, the recovery up to 2023 is 100% in the mild level, mild scenario, and then 70% in the medium and 43% in the severe scenario for South Asia. So that's 2023, which is more or less recovered if we are a little bit more optimistic. For Southeast Asia is similar, actually up to 2023, it will be fully recovered. But still, if you consider the severe scenario is around 48% of recovery. So these are the regional level forecasts. I also present some country level forecasts. For China, for example, the recovery up to 2023 only recovered 83% because I think China has been very strict in terms of allowing international travelers into China. So due to this very severe control of international travel, so the recovery tend to be slower. So up to 2023, is we predict it's only 83% recovery compared with 2019. In the severe scenario, it's only about around 42%. And also the main source market for China, as you can see from right-hand side of the diagram, is still China. Actually, it's more than 50% to 55% arrivals actually are from China, from mainland China, and then followed by Macau, Chinese Taipei, Korea, Japan, and USA. So these are the market share. Okay. Right. In terms of Hong Kong, so since I'm in Hong Kong, so I probably present the situation in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is better. Up to 2013, actually, is fully recovered. We also see about 18% growth compared with 2019, and that's I think Hong Kong, in a sense, that it has controlled the pandemic reasonably well, although there's some small resurgence of cases recently, but I think overall Hong Kong has controlled the pandemic well, and give people confidence in terms of traveling to Hong Kong from different source markets. And Hong Kong is also planned to open some travel bubbles and the corridors with a few countries, and that will help the visitor arrivals in Hong Kong. And the medium scenario is 84% recovery compared to 2019, and the severe case is 55%. It's quite optimistic for Hong Kong. And that is also because Hong Kong relies greatly on arrival from China. As you can see, 80%, more than 80% of arrivals in Hong Kong are still projected to be from China, and then followed by other source market. And Thailand, for Thailand, also it's quite positive. In 2023, we'll see fully recovered from the pandemic, and also the medium scenario is 77%, and the worst scenario or the severe scenario is 50%. And the right-hand side is the market share. Still, China will dominate the market, followed by Malaysia, Indonesia, India, and Korea, and so on. So these are Thailand. In terms of US is quite severe in terms of the COVID-19 situation now. Up to 2023, about 90% recovery, and then in the severe case, it's only about 50% recovery up to 2023. And this is a market share on the right-hand side. So in conclusion, the total arrivals in Asia Pacific will recover to 667.67 million, around 96% in the mild scenario in 2023, and to 523.1 million in the medium scenario, and also 342 million in the severe scenario up to by the end of 2023. So this is our different possibilities. The Pacific will have the highest recovery rate in all the scenarios of the forecasting period, i.e. 102% recovery in the mild scenario, and 78% in the medium scenario, and 51% in the severe scenario. The lowest recovery rate is Turkey. Actually, it's only 93% recovery by 2023. And the severe scenario is only 42.7%. That is a country level. And the forecast will be further updated when the situation evolves, especially when the vaccine inoculation, how effective that may be in terms of control the pandemic, and that will inform us in terms of future adjustment of our forecast. So there will be a couple of more adjustment in the next few months in terms of the scenario forecast. So hopefully we'll update you in the future. So please stay tuned with the announcement from PATA. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Song. We'll see Professor Song later on in the discussion. So thank you so much for that. And sorry, let me just apologize. I know there's been a problem with the slide that Professor Song had shown before. You know, during testing before, there wasn't any problems, but for some reason now the slide had been cut off at the top and bottom. However, I will just remind everybody here, these slides, all the slides from all the presenters, will be available and sent to all participants after the webinar is finished. So you will get a copy of the slides, the one that Professor Song showed, and the slides from the two presenters coming up next. And with that, let me jump to our next presenter, who will be presenting on future outlook, looking beyond COVID-19 for recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the head of travel research at Euromonitor International, Ms. Caroline Bremner. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. I shall just share my slides now. Can you see that?
Yes, it looks good, and nothing's cut off. Perfect.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to present our latest economic research. So I'm Caroline Bremner. I'm the head of travel research at Euromonitor International. And today we're looking at the future outlook, looking for signs of, recovery beyond COVID-19. And so what I'll be doing is sharing our latest view of the global economy. And then we'll drill down and have a look at the country economic outlook for those 39 PATA destinations. I'm also going to share some of our consumer behavior research that we have, and then I'll do a quick wrap up. So obviously, for those of you who aren't familiar with Euromonitor, we are a global market research company, and we have 15 offices around the world. And I'm delighted that one of my colleagues who works in the economies and consumers team, Gidris Dalinis, has also joined us today, and he will help with any sort of methodology questions at the end of the presentation. But I must say, having such a large network of analysts in 100-odd countries around the world has just been so fundamental to our understanding of what's happening with COVID and its impact on economies, consumers, and of course, travel and tourism. So we have this great team of economists and who work in our analytics team, and they produce research looking at what's happening in economies around the world. And so our latest research, which we published this month, so we update the GDP figures every month, and then of course we use that to inform our industries such as travel and tourism. But what I'm doing today is presenting that economic outlook. So we expect this sort of sharp recession in the global economy for 2020, and this is looking at the baseline that we expect recovery to begin from mid-2021. And that's based on the development that we're seeing in terms of the vaccine, which Professor Song was outlining, and of course, the subsequent rollout of the vaccination program in countries and regions around the world. But if we just take a look to see just how sharp that contraction was in different regions of the world, you can see that China had a major slowdown but avoided recession. But when you look at the Eurozone, we can see that there was a very sharp decline of over 9% last year. Same in the US, and we also see that the emerging economies were equally as affected than the advanced economies, contracting by 4%. However, we do expect a sharper rebound for the emerging economies, growing by 6% this year if we are able to contain the virus and again get those vaccine programs rolled out. However, there is, as we've been talking about today, there's so much uncertainty and volatility, as Mario said. And, it's really important that we address that and that we build different scenarios, as Professor Song has presented as well. And this is something that we do at Euromonitor. So we have our baseline view of the world economy here, but then we also have three additional pessimistic scenarios. And of course, these are all built, and they all have assumptions behind them. And it's based on the rate of the fatalities, the rate of infection, when we expect the mass vaccination rollout to take place. And for the best case, that's our baseline, we expect one global wave of COVID, followed by smaller regional ones. And then, as I mentioned, that vaccine rollout happening from mid-2021, which would then allow the economy to begin to recover. However, in our worst case scenario, which is pessimistic 3, we would see that contraction in the global economy also happening in 2021, this year. And we factored in that there would be 2 or 3 additional global waves of COVID. And of course, with the variants, this is quite concerning. And that would then also lead to concerns about, well, how effective are the vaccines, and can they be rolled out and distributed widely? And that could potentially delay that process until 2022 or 2023. But that is our worst case scenario, and it has a very low probability that our economist team has given that scenario. And of course, at Euromonitor, we are also tracking consumer spending. So I just wanted to share what we see across the different consumer industries in terms of growth last year. And what we can sort of glean from this information is that consumers, because they are, they've had to sort of hibernate at home, and there's concerns about health and safety, of course, with the disease, and this has really meant that we've seen strong growth for home care, such as disinfectants, to keep the house clean and things like that. We've also seen an increase in say toys and games to keep the kids occupied while they're working, they're doing their schoolwork at home. And of course, packaged food. But on the negative side, we've seen a very sharp drop for discretionary items such as personal accessories, fashion, luxury, eyewear, and those larger ticket items such as appliances. And then if you factor in travel and tourism and experience-led services such as food service, this is where we're looking at per capita expenditure of food service and travel versus say packaged food and those other industries. You can see that travel was by far the worst hit in terms of 2020, and in terms of that sharp decline in consumer spending as a result of the travel bans, the lockdowns, the restrictions, business travel completely drying up. So, this is the baseline, and we would expect within 3 to 4 years, as in line with what Hong Kong PolyU have also presented today, that in the best case that we would see travel return to those pre-crisis 2019 levels by around about 2024. Now let's turn and have a look at those countries that PATA covers in its destination reports, and we're obviously delighted to be a content partner with PATA and share our view of economies. Now, this is looking at GDP for last year and then the forecast outlook for 21 to 24. And these were the worst affected countries. And what we see is that Macau was by far the worst hit in terms of its economy. It's highly dependent on tourism and service industries such as, casinos and all that sort of revenue that comes from Chinese tourism. And actually, we are expecting that there will be a recovery over the next couple of years. But again, this is the baseline, and we can run those different scenarios as well to see, what are the expected recovery times depending on what happens with the disease. Equally, countries such as the Maldives, again, heavily dependent on tourism, where over 60% of their economy is derived from that. This very sharp drop last year. But overall, we expect countries even such as the advanced countries such as Japan to recover. These were the least impacted in terms of their economy last year. You can see Vietnam, Myanmar, China all managed to see positive growth in their economy despite the slowdown, despite the contraction in economic activity. For example, Vietnam's exports slowing, remittances slowing, etc. But we still continue, as I say, this is the baseline, and we do expect a strong rebound, especially for those countries with young emerging economies such as Cambodia or Myanmar, which are sort of growing very, very fast from a low base. Equally, we are able to look at disposable income. When I presented this chart last May, it was actually Hong Kong that had the highest disposable income per capita. It's dropped down the rankings, and we now see that the US is leading in terms of the PATA countries that we look at. So yeah, we are seeing expected strong growth, particularly in Myanmar, Malaysia, and the Philippines, of over 6% per year over the next 3 years. And then even for Japan, we are expecting positive growth, but it's still very, very low, restrained by the sort of the aging population and a much slower growth of the economy. So I mentioned that we had some consumer behavior data, and here we've been tracking over the last few quarters the changes in behavior of consumers around the world, and this is looking at different regions. So of course, some things have been accelerated by COVID, and one of them is particularly online shopping. And this is expected to remain a permanent change in consumer behavior. And what was really surprising was this very permanent shift to working from home across all the different regions, even the emerging markets. Of course, there's a strong and permanent shift towards health and wellness products. But what's more alarming when we look at sort of future recovery for tourism is the fact that reduced international travel is expected to be a permanent shift for particularly Latin America and Western Europe. So that suggests that we're going to have a structural shift and permanent reduction in the potential for growth. But at the same time, many consumers are switching and substituting to domestic tourism. And of course, domestic tourism, it was impacted by COVID, of course, but it was less affected. So globally, we see that domestic tourism fell by about 25% last year, compared to over 50% for international tourism receipts. And domestic tourism is always, played second fiddle to international tourism. But actually, when you look at it as a share, as a percentage of overall tourism expenditure, it's 73% globally. And it's actually a very good and resilient way to kickstart economies. And of course, we've seen many destinations pivot to domestic tourism as a means for recovery in the short to mid-term. And interestingly, for Asia Pacific, domestic tourism is forecast to outperform international tourism over the next 3 years. So thank you very much for having me today. I'd just like to summarize our findings. So we are expecting a sharp drop in the global economy for 2020, with a rebound in the best case scenario from mid-2021, but that is all predicated on the development of the vaccine program and the rollout globally. And of course, in the short to midterm, we have these major consumer shifts away from international travel because of the bans, restrictions, the new protocols, such as quarantine. And of course, there is this opportunity to look at domestic tourism as a recovery driver. And this seems to be a strong opportunity for Asia Pacific as it gradually opens up, and equally, it's going to take time to develop those safe travel corridors. So the domestic is a useful vehicle there. And of course, this is an opportunity for us to move away from the volume-driven tourism model of old, and to embrace a more value-driven model, which really sort of focuses on optimizing the revenue and the opportunities that travel and tourism can bring for local communities and businesses. So, of course, we've got the UN development agenda, and this is a great moment to really embrace that. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure to join you today, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Share my screen. We'll hear more from Caroline, as she said, at the discussion. So let's move along to our next presentation. From TCI Research, we have the CEO who will provide an update on the travel sentiment towards APAC. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, as I said, the CEO of TCI Research, Mr. Olivier Henry-Biabaud.
Thank you, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll share my screen right now. Off we go. I think it's all clear. I hope you can see it in full screen. Well, thanks again for the invitation, and I'm really happy to have that opportunity to update with you about the travel, the sentiment overall. I think when it comes to anticipate travelers' choices, and it's very hard to do right now, but when it comes to anticipate the demand, it's really key to understand and to measure the level of trust, because we know people are going to travel where they can travel, but also where they trust, and the places they trust, the hotels they trust, and the attraction they trust. So the level of trust is really an essential component of a travel planning, and it's of course influenced by the level of e-reputation. So the following data are coming from the travel sentiment, which is a social listening techniques applied to travel and tourism. And basically what we measure is the state and the dynamic of destinations' e-reputation and level of trust, based on everything which is shared by the medias, by consumers or companies or citizens, and also officials, by DMOs. That fuels the overall sentiment. It cannot be predictive, of course, but it's very important, again, to have a good level of trust and e-reputation, because this is essential to generate favorability towards your destinations, your hotels, and your attraction, and especially, of course, in the context of a crisis as we are living still today. So starting first with one of the key indicators, which is the net sentiment score. This indicator is actually a way to measure the polarity or the balance between positive and negative social conversations on social networks, online, on forums, blogs, and so on. So we measure the balance between positive and negative, and that creates the net sentiment score. And as you can see, all over 2020, there has been a rebound taking place quite quickly, and especially in Asia Pacific, and this is measuring the consolidated average for the top 20 destinations across the region. We have been seeing a quite positive trend, and especially a very nice positive momentum in the last quarter of 2020. I think the net score has gained something like 20 points in the last quarter, which is of course quite encouraging. So today I have to say that Asia Pacific, if we look at the overall reputation through social conversations, is benefiting from a quite higher or more positive reputation compared to some other regions in the world, Europe or Americas. Having said that, Asia, just like the other regions, have not fully recovered the brand equity, which should be around 60 points. But one important element to consider is the volatility of that indicator. And unfortunately, I have to say that the interim data for January are showing a bit of a decline all over the world. So all regions are seeing a bit of decline of reputation now as we speak in January. And the other factor to consider is that the sentiment towards Asia Pacific, again, based on what people are saying and sharing all over the web and online, is very different according to the region. Whereas Asia Pacific has a quite positive reputation in Asia, in Europe, particularly in some places in Europe like Germany, which really would consider again Asia as soon as it is possible to travel there. Whereas those regions are generating and fueling a positive sentiment again towards Asia, a country, or let's say regions like North America and particularly in the US, there the level of trust, the level of confidence and reputation about Asia Pacific tends to be lower than in other regions. So in practice, it means that for DMOs, if you are operating a hotel, tour operators, probably North America would deserve a very special treatment in terms of communication, because there the region would deserve probably a better communication and making sure that you keep the link with Americans, which remains a major potential outbound market. Now, if we look at a selection of destinations in terms of net sentiment score, which again reflect the polarity of conversations between positive and negative comments, reports, and shares about those destinations in, of course, context of travel and tourism, you have examples there of different clusters. There are a group of countries and destinations in Asia which still today somehow enjoys a very high level of competitiveness in terms of sentiment and reputation. Destinations like Macau or Indonesia, the Maldives, Sri Lanka, they really have today strong level of positive reputation above 50 points, sometimes 60 points, which is really great, which is actually the kind of a normal kind of reputation. Then you have a group of destinations, including some of the big names, Singapore, Japan, Thailand, which reputation have been relatively preserved in the past 6 months. So it means they still have a lot to do to recover fully, but so far so good. The level of reputation is quite okay. And then there's a group of countries where we see their reputation have been recently a bit more exposed or a bit more challenged. And there we find some of the largest destinations and very, very big names, including, of course, China, but also Australia, South Korea, Taiwan. It means that the reputation is still positive there, but there is still a gap to make up. But what's interesting on a more positive note is about China. China has been seen in many parts of the world as a bit the place where it all began. But today, China is really resuming back, is really back on track in terms of sentiment. It used to be negative for a couple of months, and now it's back in positive. And whereas the whole region gained 20 points in the last quarter, in China, the net sentiment score towards China has gained almost 40 points or 35 points in average in the last quarter. So we have good hope that China should recover gradually the level of trust of what it is. So a very iconic, amazing destinations in Asia. Then looking at what is fueling the sentiment, and it is probably more interesting to understand why the sentiment is going up or down over time. And so we've done a very quick analysis about what has been the main drivers, which for many of them can be opportunities for communication, for DMOs or for attractions or for hotels. And so looking at what drives conversations about Asia in positive and in negative, starting with the positive, of course, one of the reasons why the net sentiment score goes so high at the end of the 2020 year was, of course, because it was the first region getting the vaccine, but also looking at conversations. Again, you know, all the reports, all shares about social life getting back in Asia. When you analyze all the sentiment, the keywords, the key hashtag used on social networks, you will find again people talking about family, about love, about holiday, work, about safety, and many shares, many positive drivers about destinations mentioned as having great nature assets, a lot of positive comments about water-related activities. It seems like in Asia, when you talk about beaches, diving, many destinations have been voted or awarded as best destinations offering the clearest waters or best diving destinations. So the water element is one of the key positive elements to communicate in Asia, to keep the link and the positive communication there. And nature is essential because you all remember that sustainability environment has been hardly hit during the pandemic and the crisis. There were so many conversations showing how beautiful places are again when there is no tourism, which is of course not good for the tourism industry. And now we see again a lot of positive communication about nature and the environment, keeping Asia's sentiment high. A lot of stories and narratives about, of course, the must-see iconic destinations, but also secondary places to visit, which are fueling destinations and the overall Asia travel sentiment high. Also, many positive stories about air transportations initiatives and partnerships. All the stories about private, public sector initiatives to cope with the problem and the crisis is fueling a lot of positive conversations on social networks and increasing the sentiment. Many arrangements, many conversations about travel bubbles between major destinations. Also this the positive way on how to continue celebrating the New Year, Christmas in a way that is maybe a bit different but still positive. And of course, and I mentioned that in past reports we've done for PATA, but the gastronomy in Asia is a core element. So if you have in your own destinations some sort of DNA about gastronomy, the more you focus on this, the more you can generate a lot of positivity towards your destinations or your attraction, because gastronomy is really part of an integral DNA of the regions. Also, of course, events and celebrations are quite difficult today, and especially when we talk about MICE. But it is true that we are capturing a lot of positive sentiment still about that, on how to continue celebrating, organizing event in a way that is different, but that is innovative, based on technology. Asia is still seen across the world as a home of a lot of technology and innovation, and that can keep the sentiment and the trust very high. And of course, that's the case in specifically when people are, locked down and they cannot travel. They want to travel, but they cannot travel. So there is a way to keep the link, and the way is very obvious. It's through cinema, screen influence. The level of influence from Netflix, Disney platform, YouTube, and equivalent in Asia is absolutely amazing. Through vlogs, through series, your destination can be portrayed there in a very positive way. There's been a lot of Asian ambassadors or names as part of the recent Forbes ranking, pointing out which are the stars on the digital planet. And all these kind of non-tourism ambassadors are playing a very great role in keeping the link with the destination in Asia in particular. And of course, many people sharing secrets, sharing past souvenirs, keeping, the social media very busy. And the more anecdotal and the better impact it has. just like this example of a young boy who bought a bike in China and get back home in the UK, I guess. And this, anecdotal stories is keeping the sentiment high, and escaping all the politics and all the sanitary conditions. And so again, the more you focus on that, the more you can create a positive link with the Asia as a potential place to visit. On the vigilance points, so some, of course, aspects are more, negative, and this is why, of course, the net sentiment score is not fully recovered today. Of course, number one is the COVID-19, and still today, as we speak, all conversations about destinations or countries in relation to travel in industry, we have still today about 30% of them mentioning COVID and the sanitary conditions. And of course, it's difficult to fuel positive conversations when you talk about COVID. But then there's another set of drivers which are more, recent in conversations and which can be seen as a vigilance point. The first is about the vaccine passport. Some people may consider it's a kind of guarantee and it can create a bit of trust, but also there are many controversies about this mandatory vaccine passport as maybe a way to travel in the future, kind of restricting a lot of freedom of traveling. So this is fueling a bit of negativity. Of course, many countries who are now imposing new bans from or sourcing countries, like the new variant from the UK. If you are British and if you hear stories about this or that destination in Asia who is going to impose a new travel ban because they fear about potential tourists from the UK, it cannot be good in terms of reputation. Also, there's a growing concern about side effects from a sanitary prospect. This super gonorrhea being potentially on the rise because of COVID-19, so creating another layer of mistrust when traveling in those countries. And from time to time, and we had a chance to reassure that residents and communities in Asia will welcome tourists again from all over the world. It has been measured through a survey recently last summer, but still there are on social web conversations regular stories about xenophobia, fueling the sentiment from consumers about, will I be really friendly welcome if I go to this place or that place? And in particular, there is still, for example, recently some conversations pointing out, for example, Australia, which used to be known as a very friendly and tolerant country, but there's a growing conversations about anti-Chinese sentiment. It's just one example. And there, obviously, it cannot be good for a destination from a destination point of view. And there has been also a couple of examples of not sustainable actions or initiatives taking place there. So you see that balance between positive and negative stories overall is fueling some encouraging sentiment towards Asia. And in other trackers, we see that from Europe, from the US, from Asia, the Asia as a whole is still very much on the bucket list. It's like from Europe, for example, 15% of potential travelers would choose Asia in 2020 if they have a chance to go there. It's a second destination in overall after Europe, of course. But then there are a couple of factors that can maybe influence it in negative, and unfortunately, it usually has nothing to do with tourism, but more about the broad context. So the most important today is to focus also on how you can make sure that if people decide to go whenever they can go again, they will choose again Asia for sure. And then you need to make sure that the experience they are going to live will be the full experience. In all the trackers, and we capture that from the sentiment as well, there's a growing concern about spending money for those who can afford to travel again, spending your money, but then when you're at destination, the experience you have is really restricted, very limited. So the concern about living the full experience today is as high, almost as high as the concern about sanitary protocol. So promoting and communicating about all the restrictions and all the sanitary protocols is fine, but you need to find the right balance between making sure that what you are going to offer is just as before, because this is what people are looking for. So amplifying the organic sentiment is what you have to do best, even if you have only 10% of visitation. Even if it's hard to communicate today, there are many ambassadors who are taking the job of resuming your sentiment, working on your reputation. And so this organic sentiment that you have example there of shares and social content, the best way is really to provide an echo to that, and making sure that you keep the link through direct channels, but also indirect influence, niche marketing about food, about Netflix series, from any sort of sentiment that can keep your reputation high in these very, very difficult times. So today, as a conclusion, I would say from the sentiment trackers, either from social listening, from the survey, we feel still a very strong desire to travel. People will go again when it will be possible to travel again. And still the destination choice today is very, very open. There are many new competition, including domestic, regional, but people will travel long haul again. And then the choice of destination will be driven by many, many factors. And whereas on the one hand, travel rules are very uncertain, travel desire is very high, probably one of the best action to do for DMOs, for attractions, for hotels, is to take time to focus on quality. Again, even if you only receive 10% of volumes, if you focus on the quality of experience today, this is the best way to protect your brand equity for the future while activating the usual social media activation. This is maybe the only thing today to invest on the quality and resuming on the quality. As maybe a piece of advice we can share today, while the situation is getting unfortunately uncertain again. So that's it for me, Paul.
Thank you very much, Olivier. You can stay right here because I think we'll go right into the panel discussion, but please just stop sharing your screen. And I'll welcome everyone back, Professor Song and Caroline. And with us moderating this Q&A is Dr. Hardy. But I believe Professor Song also has his colleague, Dr. Anu, here to help answer any questions as well. And Caroline has her colleague, Idris, to help her answer any questions that might come up as well. And with that, I'll pass this over to you, Mario. You have 10 minutes. I know we're a bit over, but have 10 minutes and use the time to answer as many questions as possible. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Yes, indeed, we have a lot of questions. We have more than 50, 60 questions actually that probably came over already. And so a lot of them are similar. So I'm going to try to summarize as much as possible so that we can fill in the 10 minutes, but answer as many questions as we possibly can. First, some very quick questions for you, Olivier, because these came up live on the Q&A already. A few questions regarding the definition of e-reputation, what do you actually mean? And also, what's the source of the data in the sentiment analysis that you provided?
Sure. So it's all based on social listening techniques. So we web crawl all mentions, article, posts on blogs, forums, online medias, and so on, which are mentioning the destination in context of travel and tourism. And so we capture all elements, share on social web conversations. We can possibly influence the reputation of the destination. So it's global. It's filtering on anything which is relevant in terms of place branding. So it's something which is based on all languages, all markets. We are a bit undercovered for China because the access to some API in China is a bit more restricted. But in overall, it gives it's not only based on visitor sentiment. It's really based on e-reputation at large. So it can be a consumer talking, it can be a media talking, it can be companies talking, officials, DMOs, of course, are also part of the shared content that we capture and analyze. So it's social listening based, and it comes from That platform is called TravelSat Competitive Sentiment Index. And so it's really social listening based. That's what I can say.
Thank you, Olivier. There was a question earlier asked by Javier, and which Professor Song already answered, but I'd like to actually bring it for the rest of the audience, for those who might have missed this, because I think this is a very important question, which many destinations are asking us on almost on a daily basis, or quite frequently, which is about the expectations for the outbound Chinese market. We all know that destinations around the world have been actually, benefiting from the very substantial amount of Chinese traveling overseas for a long period of time. So Javier's this question was really about, what do we anticipate for the future in terms of outbound Chinese market? Are they going to come back? Or and also, are their destinations going to change? So Professor Song, if you maybe would like to repeat your answer, and then I also like to hear feedback from both Caroline and Olivier on that question.
Okay, yes, thank you for the question. Although I answered briefly in the Q&A chat box, but I think since China has already recovered, almost fully recovered from COVID-19, so the Chinese citizens are ready to travel, basically. That is really depend on the destinations whether the pandemic is fully controlled, and whether they open up to the Chinese travelers. I think that's probably is the key, which will determine whether the Chinese tourists will travel, right? So that's, I think in terms of Chinese tourists, because the situation in China is already controlled, the domestic travel is booming, right? So actually many people shift away from traveling internationally domestically. So that's just already happening in China. So I think if the destination situation improve and control the COVID-19 cases, the Chinese tourists will travel to, and also the border opens to Chinese travelers as well. So in terms of whether the destination will change, I think probably to some extent there were some changes. The Chinese will still prefer to travel to the destinations where have a similar or close ties to China, mostly in Asia Pacific, which has always been. Hong Kong attracted actually quite a big percentage of Chinese tourists, and Thailand, Japan, Korea, Taiwan as well. So still the major destination will be still in Asia or Pacific, but other destinations, especially long haul destinations, will be benefited by those younger generations who will be more adventurous, and also the income level has increased. They can afford to travel internationally. So yes, I think I'm quite positive if the COVID-19 situation is controlled. Many destinations will still benefit from the Chinese tourists.
Thank you, Professor Song. Olivier, do you have any brief comment? And Caroline, I'll come back to you with a different question in a minute.
Yeah, it seems from all the trackers, whether from social listening or also from basic surveys that we're doing for a European Travel Commission, for example, that the Chinese seems to continue to have a very strong desire to travel. Of course, currently they travel domestically a lot, but I have to tell, in this, the domestic travel is booming, but it's just, it's of course it's a choice, but in many cases you don't have any other choices. So where you go, where you can go, right? So Chinese are going domestically. They would travel regionally first, but in a very recent survey, we have clear evidence that, for example, Europe is seen as a destination to travel in this year, if possible, as the same level as Asia Pacific. So intentions and desire still tends to be strong. Maybe the difference is they will, when you ask the question about what will activate or what could trigger your travel plans internationally for this year, then you have a very strong, let's say, expectation about going to countries where they would feel welcome, first of all, and also where there is some sort of official really sanitary protocol well in place. They want to have safety, of course. It already was the case, with all the terror attack before. Today, they really want to make sure that if they choose Europe, if they choose the US or whatever other destinations internationally, there are very strict hygiene and sanitary protocol in place. We see that more than in other markets. They are a bit less skeptical about living the full experience because they know how to manage that. From what we see in our data, the desire is still very, very high, including outside domestically and including outside the let's say Asia Pacific region, which is good news potentially for all the destinations and also across Asia Pacific. And again, it's a matter of when they will be able to go outside their own country. It's again a matter of possibility, at least as a matter of pure travel demand or choice.
Thank you, Olivier. Caroline, before you mentioned about you saw potential growth, or actually saw growth in your research for Macau, the Maldives, which is somehow kind of expected for us from the numbers we've seen. But you had the third country, you had India, which I think surprised maybe a few people. Could you explain your reasoning why actually you see India as being one of the countries that will be leading in growth moving forward?
Well, I think with India, obviously there's a huge potential. It's a very large economy. It's a very young and dynamic economy. It's very digitally savvy. So there are sort of factors that support that. And obviously with it's also, this is on the economy side. Service driven technology and as I say, the rise of the middle class. So yes, India is struggling with COVID, as many destinations are. So it will take a while for travel and tourism to come back, but at the same time, there's still a lot of growth potential in India.
Thank you. My following question from this is, we know that pre-COVID-19, China was the leading outbound market, and a few others were at the top of the list. Do you foresee that the order of the outbound market moving forward will change? Will countries that were at the top in terms of outbound source market will shift in the world order moving forward?
That's a great question, and I think as Professor Song said that and Olivier as well, that once it's safe to travel, people will return to travel. So you can see that China will recover, and it'll be one of the fastest to recover, because obviously they went into the pandemic first. They've controlled the situation very well, and equally we know that there's a very high level of desire to travel. It's they really enjoy international travel and those kind of authentic experiences. We see that coming through our research. So I do feel that China will remain in the top, if not the leading outbound destination. I think that we're going to see the UK struggling in the short to mid-term, because we're still having to get hold on COVID, but two, we've just had Brexit. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, particularly in terms of, income, employment. We're still, in the throes of the furlough schemes, etc. So the UK, I can see moving down. The US, again, it depends what happens with the new president-elect coming in. And equally, if he gets sort of stronger control over the pandemic situation, then equally the US will rebound quite quickly as well. We saw that North America are on the outbound side, Canada as well, expected to really want to go and travel as soon as they can.
Thank you, Caroline. I saw Professor Song smile before when I asked the question, so would you care to comment?
Right. Okay. I think, yeah, in terms of the order, I think China will still be the dominant source market for many regions. But for some smaller source market, depend on their domestic COVID-19 situation control, there may be a delay in terms of outbound travel, but China certainly will still be the one to be dominant, the outbound travel in the world to different destinations, depend on whether the destination has controlled the pandemic situation. So that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Thank you. And I know our time is up, but if you don't mind, I'd like to carry on for maybe just another 4 or 5 minutes just to answer a couple more questions. There are actually so many that came in that are actually quite interesting. But there's one in particular that is close to me and of course to us who are living in Thailand. There's a question from a person who works for the Thailand bank, the Bank of Thailand, earlier regarding the figures for Thailand, Professor Song. Considering that at the moment our borders are still closed, considering that actually we will not see a rollout of the vaccine until starting until next month, and solely for the key workers and gradually. So essentially, we will not have mass vaccination until much later in the year, possibly the third quarter. I think many of us are looking at numbers and looking at probably the lower end as probably more realistic, but even those numbers seems somehow optimistic considering where we are today. So I think there's a few people who ask questions about the assumptions that were made in putting the numbers together, Professor Song. So I don't know if you, either yourself or Anu, can actually share a little bit about the assumptions that were made.
Yeah, I think I will first briefly comment, and my colleague Anu will answer probably in greater details. All these scenarios, 3 scenarios for all destinations are set based on the principle that actually Caroline already presented in terms of how the different scenarios are set. Basically, the in our cases, mild scenario is probably similar to the optimistic scenario of Euromonitors, which actually assuming the pandemic is controlled in 2020 and the vaccine already started to roll out, and there will be no further rebound of COVID-19. Well, that's optimistic scenario. The medium scenario actually was assuming there's a smaller rebound in the winter of now actually end of last year and beginning of this year, and then the vaccine started to roll out at a relatively later stage, and then our optimistic scenario in our case, a severe scenario is that there were a major rebound of COVID-19, and the vaccine is not working because this fast spread of the second or third or fourth wave of COVID-19. I think that's the scenario, and also we consider other possibilities. I think all these assumptions are more or less in line with Euromonitors and UNWTO. I think Anu probably could respond a little bit more in terms of the details, in terms of how those scenarios are set.
Yeah, thank you for Professor's answer. And we set the scenarios as Professor just introduced based to the overall visitor arrivals to PATA. And then we also consider the social distancing measures, the development of the pandemic in each destination, and also the country of origins. And also we consider travel ban set by different governments. Then we differentiate the scenarios in each destination. That's why when you see the overall forecast is around, we say it will recover to 70% in the neutral scenario, which is consistent with the UNWTO setting. But in each different destinations, we have the customized forecast over the next 3 years.
Thank you very much. I'll answer one last question, and I'll actually answer that one if you don't mind. So there was a question regarding domestic travel. A lot of questions regarding domestic travel, and a lot of questions also relating to intra-regional travel, essentially mainly here in ASEAN, within Asia. And certainly from our discussions with the ASEAN ministries over the various forums over the last few months, we know that the countries are working closely together to open corridors between the ASEAN countries over the coming month. Obviously, this is all dependent on how the situations on the ground is being handled in each respective countries. We know that some are doing better than others at the moment, and we believe they will be gradual. So certainly before the end of the year, I do anticipate that intra-travel between Asia will definitely restart. But it may not be open to all countries traveling to each other. It might actually be only certain countries that open to others based on their handling of the current situation. It's hard to predict at the moment which will open to which, because the situation keeps changing, as I mentioned before. Before the New Year holidays, Thailand was doing really fantastically well in managing the situation. Sadly, over the last couple of weeks, we had a resurgence of new cases, and things are actually not looking so positive for the time being. We do anticipate, however, that in Thailand, things will get better probably within the next 4 to 6 weeks. We'll start seeing improvement again. So these situations will continuously change between each destination. And that's something we need to monitor. And as I mentioned before, at the early stage when we started this webinar, is that it's really difficult to anticipate at the moment changes moving forward. In order to be resilient, we need to be able to adapt to the various situations and monitor closely how situations are changing from one country to another. So on that note, Olivier, Professor Song, Caroline, and you, I'd like to thank each one of you for having joined us today for this webinar and for sharing your insights and your experience. For those who attended from around the world, thank you very much for having joined us today. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm going to hand over the microphone back to Paul. And one last thing before I leave and before I hand over the mic, as a reminder, as Professor Song mentioned before, one thing we will do different this year is that we will do another summary review in mid-year, either June or July, because we know that the situations keep changing again. And if necessary, we might come back and do it more often again. So again, thank you very much. Paul, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mario, and thank you to all our speakers for their presentations and for answering all those questions. I've also noticed they've been answering questions, typing them directly into the Q&A, so thank you very much for getting to that. So as Mario has said, we have our Professor Song was presenting on our Asia Pacific Visitor Forecast 2021 and 2023. That the executive summary will be released this Thursday, so be on the lookout. The press release will go out on Thursday. The full report will be released in the first half of February, so I believe the second week of February. Both reports will be on the PATA website at www.pata.org. Please just go under our catalog, look at the tool at the menu bar at the top, and just look to the catalog, and you'll be able to find all our research that we've done. We've done a bunch of research over the past 3 months, so we have plenty of other research that you guys can also download and review for yourself. A lot of them are open to all, so feel free to look at that research. A lot of the research is from actually our Crisis Resource Center, so I want to remind everyone there that we also have a Crisis Resource Center. On that website, we have various toolkits, we have training kits, and a lot of content that may be helpful for you as you look towards recovery. Just wanted to go into our upcoming webinars. Next Thursday at 3 p.m. Bangkok time, we have our first Destination Insight series of 2021. This is something that we started last year with BBC. We've already looked at the Maldives, Singapore, Azerbaijan, and the Philippines. This year we start with incredible India. We have the Director General from the Ministry of Tourism, Government India. the Indian Hotels Company Limited, Indigo, of course, BBC presenter Rajan Datar from the Travel Show. That is next Thursday at 3 p.m. If you want to register, just go to our website, www.pata.org. You'll find registration details there. Also in February, this is the same week that we'll be releasing our full report for the forecast. Will be our PATA Beyond Travel Recovery Solutions event from February 8th to the 11th. We are just finalizing the program now, but please do join us for that event. More information can be found at our website, and I hope all of you can join us there. And if you have any questions about today's webinar or any other activities that PATA is doing, feel free to contact me. My email is fairly easy. It's paul@pata.org. As I said, all information is also on our website. All of our previous webinars, as well as this webinar, will be available on our YouTube page. So please do like and subscribe to keep up to date with all of our webinars. And you can watch all of our previous webinars as well. Also follow us on social media if you haven't. We have a Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, it's pata.hq, and on Instagram, it's pata_HQ. And with that, once again, I would like to thank all of our speakers for their presentations, which will be available for all participants after this webinar is over. Please just give us a few days so we can get it all together and send it out. Thank you, of course, to all of our partners and our members, life members, chapter members, and all of you who are joining us today. All of this is possible. All this is not possible without your support. So thank you again, and I will hopefully see you at our next webinar next Thursday. Take care and have a good day. Bye.